Hello and welcome, stargazers. It is I, APM, your intrepid star guide and cosmic detective, and we're back with another episode of the Outlaw Astrology podcast, in which we explore the mysterious, the unknown, the inexplicable, and more than often than not, we ask the big questions. In this episode of Season 9, Episode 2, we're going to be going back into the tragic story of Jonestown and examine the astrological aspects that may have predicted its devastating conclusion and possible consequences. But first, we have a trigger warning. We will be discussing mild graphic violence in this episode and the one following. So if you are sensitive to that or to the topic, feel free to give this one a pass. And some housekeeping. If you like what you're hearing, please like, subscribe and share, and give us 5 stars on Spotify and Apple iTunes so other people can find us with greater ease. And now on with the show. Okay, so we're back in life in the compound. And so what we're going to talk about is the challenging planetary aspects that reflected the increasingly and controlling atmosphere in Jonestown. So when people arrived as early as early as April of 1975, thereabouts, at first it was idyllic, or at least it was meant to be idyllic. So let's do a quick overview of the timeline to have a better understanding of what was going on at that point. And then we'll move on. So the People's Temple opens in 1955-56. In about 1961, Jones is appointed chairman of the Indianapolis Human Rights Commission. There is a change in residence in 1962 when Jones and family moves to Brazil due to concerns about the Cold War and nuclear fallout. Travel begins in 63 when the initial visit to Guyana occurs. In 65, the People's Temple is moved from Indianapolis to Northern California. Business starts. In 71, a new temple is opened in LA, and also in 71, a new temple is opened in San Francisco. Travel begins in 1977 when followers are brought to Guyana, and in April 1st, 77, the People's Temple is exposed in a newspaper article, which results eventually on the 19th of November 1978, the death of Jim Jones by suicide at the age of 47. And so that's what we've got so far. That's what we've gotten up to so far. And if you have not listened to the first episode, I invite you to go back and do so, because we're going to start from the compound. So as early as about 77, we are looking at what life would be like back then. Now, it was meant to be a utopia. It was meant to be wonderful. It was meant to be a respite away from anti-socialist sentiment, because Jim Jones was very enamored of socialist concepts and ideas, and Lenin and Stalin were both heroes in his childhood. And so, when they first arrived in Guyana, let me set the stage for you. Guyana was at that point a very small country and in South America, and not at that point particularly well developed. They were not a rich country. There was a large population of people of color, and English was not the first spoken language. They were a bit cash-strapped. And so Jones, because he has that very powerful MC in Libra, had the ability to be very chatty-talky. He was very good at relating to people. That was a strength. His social persona, because the MC, even in a criminal chart, is still about how you are perceived by the public. And he was perceived by the public as somebody who was good at relating to other people, someone who was about fairness, someone who built bridges. And so he was doing that very thing, building bridges in Guyana, making all sorts of promises about how the People's Temple could be good for the economy of Guyana. And so the land they set up in was rather remote. It wasn't near anything. And so a lot of buildings, wells, and things of that nature would have to have been built. Now, survivors who care to speak on the topic said initially it was hard, yes, but they felt that they were working toward a better future, that they were living in alignment with their values, and they didn't mind the hard works. They built the buildings, they set up the pavilion, they did everything that was possible and necessary to set everything up so that they could survive out in the jungle, in the remoteness out there, because there wouldn't be all the necessities, all the luxuries that people would be used to coming from the United States. And so when they got there, at some point there was a deluge. Keeping in mind also that the temperatures there tended to be hotter and a bit more sultry. And if you're coming from San Francisco, for example, which has more of a moderate temperature, it's going to be difficult. It was difficult for Jim Jones, for example, because he had mental health issues, but he also was suffering quite a few physical challenges. He was severely deteriorated. His lungs were filling up with fungus. He was suffering from prostate, blood pressure, and had fevers. And so that necessitated the use of drugs. Now, at this point in time, there was a deluge of people. Now, at first, it was just a few people, which is fine. The community could take that. But what they could not do is handle a deluge of people. And so eventually, when more members of the People's Temple arrived, they were not actually set up for the deluge of people. At its height, there were about almost 1,000 people there, and that was more than the situation, more than that settlement could handle. And so life increasingly at the compound became very challenging. Now, if I've not already said, Jones studied regularly Adolf Hitler and someone by the name of Father Divine, who was an early mentor in his religious studies. And the whole point of the exercise was learning how to manipulate people better. Divine, his mentor, had said that they needed to find a common enemy, and to make certain that everybody within the group knew who that enemy was, because it would unite everybody in the group and make them more subservient to him. Allegedly, I say, allegedly. This is allegedly to have been said. And so, as the deluge of people came and they started having less of an ability to take care of all these people, feed them, house them, clothe them in this remote section of Guyana, which was near nowhere and nothing, in a country that at that point was not a rich country and had financial challenges. You can see how this might have led up to eventually all of the conspiracies that happened. So what started to happen was that they started doing what is called white nights, which are basically drills. He would yell, "Alert, alert," over the Jonestown speakers. Everybody would congregate and assemble in the pavilion. They would then be surrounded by guards with weapons, and he would give them options. They would then attempt to flee. They would commit revolutionary suicide, or stay in Jonestown and fight the purported attackers, or flee into the jungle. On more than 2 occasions, after a revolutionary suicide was reached, they then simulated a mass suicide, which was then rehearsed, and everybody did it. So eventually everybody was given a glass of red liquid to drink, and they were told that the liquid contained poison. They would die within 45 minutes. They were all to do as they were told, and everybody did. When the time came, after a 45-minute period, everyone was supposed to have dropped dead, and when no one dropped dead, Jones explained that the poison was not in fact real, and had it in fact been a loyalty test. And he was just testing them. And he also told them the time would not be far off where this might actually be real poison, and they would be drinking for real. One of the drills was known to have lasted for 6 days, and was called the 6-Day Siege, and it was a symbol of the community's indomitable spirit, and the settlers were forced to ring around the commune with weapons and whatever tools they could get. And Jones claimed that there were mercenaries bent on murder and abducting his family and the family of those inside, and they were meant to stand strong and firm. You can read more about this if you care to, or look at many of the documentaries available, because I don't want to go into excessive detail. This is actually more about astrology, although I am fascinated by this topic. And after 76, I must also note that there was cyanide delivered to the compound. So this is giving you the idea. It was increasingly getting very paranoid, and people were encouraged to inform upon others. Now, as early as 78, and by the way, the sun would have been in Taurus and Gemini that month. So you're going from that dogged, steadfast type of energy, because the sun is consciousness, by the way. And if you're looking at it in Gemini, it is very restless. It becomes very restless consciousness energy, meaning ideas are very scattered. Everything's everywhere. Nobody knows what's going on. Things get started and drop just very quickly. So you go from very stoic, very steady in consciousness to suddenly everything's scattered. Nobody knows what the hell is going on, and nobody understands a thing. So as early as May, that happened. So by April, there was a lot of high-ranking officials visited. News agency from the Soviet Union visited. There were loyalists from the Soviet Union popping by that entire year of 1978, leading up to the 19th of November. In late 77 and early 78, a family, and several families, in fact, were starting to bring up concerns. That's when the concerned relatives started to appear. And they started saying, hey, we can't talk to our family members. We're very concerned. We don't know what's going on. Not to mention the fact that some of those family members had family members back in the United States who disappeared or turned up dead, which led to Congressman Leo Ryan getting involved, because at least one of those people in the United States who suddenly just turned up dead for no reason was a close friend. And he, hearing all of those concerns and being upset for that family member who was a close friend of his, decided to turn up to investigate, because he was hearing things he didn't like hearing. Now, to be clear and to be fair, this was way out of the United States' jurisdiction. Even though these are American citizens, they are not on American soil, which makes this very dicey to begin with. So on the 17th of February, there was an interview with Jones. Now consider that on the 17th of February, the sun would have been in Pisces thereabouts. But let me get that chart pulled up and let's have a look. On the 17th of February, the sun was at 28 degrees of Aquarius. So that is very humanitarian energy, even socialist. That would make Uranus, which would be in Scorpio this year, the ruler of that house, the shot caller of everything going on there. And that means very progressive, forward-thinking, very socialist ideas will be very, very much in play. However, since we're talking about the dark side, this is coldness, a lack of empathy, a dissociation toward other people's feelings, their needs, their wants, and the focus would be on your vision. So Jones was very much interested in his vision. He was going to stick it out. He was going to insist that everybody else stick it out. He had a thing about loyalty in its extremes, and that's because you have a very strong Pluto. He had it in Cancer, and he also had it right on top of his Jupiter in the 7th house in his chart, which means, I interpret it this way, going to extremes, and when it's going from one extreme to the other extreme with no point in between, meaning you are loyal to me and devoted to me, or you're not. And if you're not, you're the enemy. Everyone in the compound called him dad or father, which I find very curious. So in this particular chart on the 17th, Uranus was at 16 degrees of Scorpio, right on top of the ascendant. There's a 3-degree orb right there. And so it was in Scorpio in the 7th house, squaring the Mercury. Mercury is at 21 degrees in the same house as the Sun, co-present with the MC. So the focus is on having a vision for the future, but that vision for the future must be grounded in the present, and it should be, but it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be skating way off the rails, and Uranus brings unexpected, shocking twists. So you don't know what other people's motives are. You know, you're asking why. What are other people's motives? What's going on? Now, this is a Pluto-ruled Uranus. Uranus, so I need to find it. There we go. Pluto is in the 6th house of the everyday with the MC at 27. So Pluto ruled, that's what's going on. So the transit would be on the outside wheel, the inside wheel would be what's going on here. So at 17, so Pluto was in Libra at that point. And that means being able, Libra, right relationship to our daily rituals. But Pluto can go to extremes. It doesn't always have the ability to regulate. And keeping in mind, it is calling the shots on that Uranus. And so the ability to have power over and to manipulate other people one is in relationship with, especially on a daily basis. So there'd need to be a daily campaign of being able to control other people. Otherwise, what would be the point? Now, in this chart, I am doing it by wheel. The by wheel will be with Jim Jones's chart and the transits of the day. And so that is what we're looking at this point. We've got Pluto, transiting Pluto at 16 degrees. And we've got natal Pluto at 19 degrees. And it is in Cancer. So they're squaring one another. Squares are not comfortable. They can create growth and change, or they could be completely controlling. In his case, they tended toward the very controlling. Alongside for the ride, about 4 degrees off in this chart, is Mars in Cancer. So on that particular day, Mars was in Cancer. It's a very protective energy, protecting the family, protecting our home kind of energy. There are guns are a way to protect the family and the home. It is hanging out in the third house. So, interviews, which is what happened on the 17th of February, there's an interview. And the whole point of the interview is to protect what they've built there by shining things in a way that looked very pretty and attractive so that people are less likely to ask questions and come looking. Because Jim Jones was doing quite a bit of quality control after that siege and everybody was tired. And so on the 17th of February, that's when the Examiner of San Francisco came and did a story. And the story was about some of the concerns of a family that was in the middle of a custody battle, and there was a lawsuit, and so it's basically an us versus them type of mentality, which you can get when you have Pluto squaring itself via transit. So there's one part that wants to build bridges, and the other part wants to be protective, and it has a tendency to go to extremes. So when you see Pluto in Cancer, that's highly authoritarian, highly protective, just do what I tell you type of vibe, whereas the other Pluto in Libra would be very manipulative. How can I use my charm to get what I want? And if that means I have to manipulate other people in ways that they would prefer that I not do, then I'm willing to do that. And so at that point on the 17th, that is what happened. Uranus was in Scorpio, Pluto was in Libra. Uranus in Scorpio is all about the intensity. It's bringing the intensity. And so that was what was happening on that particular day. Now we move on to the 11th of April. Now, we've arrived on the 11th of April, and that's when the concerned relatives started distributing packets of documents, including letters and affidavits about human rights violations to the People's Temple, to the press, and to members of the Congress. So that is what happened on that particular day. The sun was in Aries, and it was at 21 degrees, and it was in a tight conjunction with Mercury. Very tight. And so is called Cazimi. The Cazimi is called under the sunbeam, and it means it's auspicious. That means, and we're looking at it in Aries, being independent, breaking rules. That is how that would have worked out. So breaking rules, thinking for yourself, independent thinking, but also considering rash behavior, being impulsive, being restless, being brutish. And so in this particular chart in the 10th house, both natally and by transit, we have the South Node, the MC, Eris, the Sun, Mercury, and Characlo. We're going to focus on the Sun and Mercury in his chart. Moon, North Node, Uranus, Venus, and the IC are all hanging out in Aries. In his natal chart, it would be in the 4th house. Okay, so they're basically, at this point, in a conjunction. So that, all that Aries energy is lighting up his 4th house. And so that's making him, or not making him. Let's rephrase that. Let's say it like this. It's highlighting the restlessness, the impulsiveness, and the tendency toward aggression. Now let me find Mars in this chart. So Mars is in Leo, and it is transiting in Leo, and his natal one is at 16 degrees. It would be in the 8th house in his chart. So his 8th house is being lit up by the transits on the 11th, and it's pure zero energy, meaning that that's Aries energy, pure Mars energy, and Mars in Leo in his 8th house would be flaring things up. Now, the reason why we're focusing on him is, one, because we don't have all the times and dates necessary to pull out the event chart, but we do have a birth certificate, birth information on hand that someone provided via his birth certificate, so we do know when he was born. And since he is the catalyst of all of this, this is why the focus is on him. So, that Leo energy wants to be seen, wants to be heard, wants to express itself authentically, and also very pride. Now, pride is not a bad thing, but it can be a bad thing when it is going up against and is powering all of that Aries energy. That is a lot. Stelliums in and of themselves are not bad things. They could be a good thing. However, given the events of those days leading up to the 19th of November 1978, I would say this is less about that. It's more toward being very aggressive, and the focus is on what Jim wanted, Jim's plans, Jim's dreams, Jim's thoughts. It was mostly about Jim and very little about everybody else. So it wasn't any more about protecting his dream. It was simply he'd created his own little kingdom and didn't like the idea of other people coming from outside to disrupt what he'd created. He had created a place where he was the God, where his word mattered, where everything he said and did was the most important thing, and that people leaned on his word, meaning they looked to him for guidance, they looked to him to what they should do, they looked to him for what they should think, and keeping in mind, Mercury hanging out in very, very fiery Aries right on the sun, that's someone who's going to be verbally impulsive, and he was, and also very abusive. And so he would be, if you watch the documentaries and listen to the audio in the documentaries, you will hear people saying, I want to go home and I want to see my family. And you'd see him manipulate them verbally. Manipulate them and say, well, aren't you happy here? Well, aren't this? Well, aren't that? Do you want to leave? Knowing perfectly well that they're surrounded by a bunch of people with guns and other people who are not on their side, they feel caught out. They feel afraid. And in more than a few cases, they would back down because they don't have the room. They don't have the support in the room. These people are going to inform on them or going to turn on them. They're afraid for themselves, so they back down. And then Jim Jones would tell them to shut up, sit down, and get out of his face. Something to that effect. And the person, you could feel just suddenly just whittling away into nothing, because wanting to see your family is not a crime. But it's disloyal to someone who likes to control other people. And so when we're looking at people's charts and looking at the astrology of Jim Jones and what was going on at that time, we're not saying that the chart or the stars made him do anything. We're simply using astrology to better understand how something that started out idealistically got out of control. Now, if you've been paying attention, you've hung out with me for the first episode, you'll note that things were never that perfect from the out. There were always people going, wait a second, hold on. His excesses were always there, always very, very noticeable. He had vices, he had mental health issues and other challenges health-wise that made him a very volatile character. Now, on this particular day, there's a lot of fire. It's a trine, basically. We call it a trine, but it's not exactly. His natal Mars would be forming a trine to his Eris, but would be, in my opinion, about 1 degree out of orb. But what this tells us about it, since it's calling the shots here, is that the focus is on him. He's very aggressive, he's impulsive, he's restless, and he has a tendency to make decisions based on emotion, particularly if he's angry or enthusiastic or in any way stimulated emotionally. So that's how I would read that. Now we're looking at, let's check out Neptune. And the reason why we're going to look at Neptune is because Neptune is about illusion. And Neptune at this point is hanging out at 2 degrees of Virgo, and it is in the 3rd house. So that means that Mercury in Aries, very impulsive, very restless, speaking without thinking, would be very high here. And so that Neptune is in Virgo. Now, Virgo is about being a healer. It's about helping. It's about assisting. It's about taking care of people. It's about being of service. But it's also highly perfectionistic, highly anxious, and people tend to be more controlling, in my opinion, because we're speculating here, when they are anxious and when they have exacting standards. Highly perfectionistic standards tend to make people very anxious. The third house is about, in psychological astrology, it's about how you think and how you communicate. And Virgo energy in Neptune, Neptune in Virgo is not a comfortable spot. Neptune likes to be in Pisces. It does not like to be in the opposite sign where it's forced to analyze things. That means here, the illusion is high standards, high exacting standards, with the idea that those standards are even achievable. And holding yourself to those standards would make you anxious, and it would make you drive other people insane trying to hold them to standards that were never meant to be held to from the beginning. So perfectionism would be the illusion that these ideals are achievable. Creating a utopian world is a beautiful dream, but it doesn't mean it's achievable at all. And matter of fact, it's an ideal. It's meant to measure against, not meant to be achievable. And so when we're looking at that Neptune at 2 degrees in the third house, we got someone with very idealistic, but those ideas are not married to reality. You can't just go to a foreign country, which you don't speak the language, and live in a remote section of that country with there weren't any roads. There weren't any roads. There was mostly jungle. One road they had was like, it barely was a road. And so without those luxuries, trying to build a utopian society would be a challenge. It's meant to be an ideal. You're not meant to achieve it. You're meant to measure against it. But this was taken very seriously, as if it could happen, and when it started to fall apart, it became very frightening for those involved, and including Jim Jones himself. So the illusion is that perfection and utopia, which Neptune is the guide for anything utopian, very idealistic, very fantastic, anything fantasy-oriented, that would be Neptune. And Neptune at 2 degrees, we're looking for anything in Pisces, and there isn't anything in Pisces at that point. And when we look for anything hanging out at 2 degrees, at 4 degrees, he has an ascendant. His ascendant is at 4 degrees, and it is in Capricorn. So that would be a trine. In a healthy expression, when a chart's being healthily expressed, this is someone who is detail-oriented, very discerning, someone who has an objective, and is able to make sacrifices in order to make that dream happen. But they are realistic. Neptune in Virgo is not realistic. Yes, they can analyze, but they'll analyze things to the point of absolute, not passivity, but paralysis. You got so many ideas and so many ways of just going at every angle, the idea that perfection can happen, and you can analyze and think your way to perfection, and that these ideals you're trying to put forth can happen. At 4 degrees, that ascendant is all about being an authority. It's all about running the show. It's about being the CEO. And so you can put your faith in my ideals. You can put your faith in me, even though by that point, Jim was suffering a lot of emotional distress and a lot of physical distress, which made his behavior highly erratic. Now, his native, and that means his birth, Neptune, is at 18 degrees of Sagittarius. And what does that tell us? Well, what that tells us in this particular chart, it means that he's very dogmatic. Now, you're going to hear a lot about how Neptune in Sagittarius is dogmatic. Not necessarily. Yes, that can be a negative thing that can happen, But that's more based on the person rather than the planetary, expression. But Neptune here is someone with deep convictions. And here's the thing about beliefs, because Jupiter would be calling the shots here, and we're going to look at that, and then we're going to move on and eventually wrap things up. So, Neptune in Sagittarius is a person of deep convictions, and here's the thing about convictions. If they're beliefs, they are not easily changeable. That using common rationale is unlikely to change anything. That a person will just dig their heels in deeper and not move. So just looking at that and saying, well, if we just explain it calm, cool, and collectively, it's going to make a difference. It won't. By the way, Jupiter's at 29 degrees of Gemini in the opposite sign, and so not in its most comfortable place. That would be the 12th house, so kind of hidden, meaning that his beliefs were not transparent to anybody around him at that point on the 11th of April. What he thought, what he felt was all over the place, wasn't transparent, and a lot of people were left guessing and therefore would have been confused, which Neptune also rules. So what he believed, what his convictions were at that point, nobody around him, not even his inner circle, would have had a clue. Now, when Congressman Ryan arrived, it would be the 14th of November. Now, he did not step foot in the compound at Jonestown yet because Jim Jones would not receive him. The sun was in Scorpio at that point. The moon was in Taurus at 11 degrees. That means the two of them were in opposition thereabouts. 11 degrees is, that's not a bad degree as degrees go. That would put it in Jim's natal 5th house. Now, the moon loves being in Taurus, absolutely. But what it does not like being is opposed to the sun. And so there's an energy of comfort and also questioning. Because people were starting to question. People start wondering, oh, wait a second, is this what we really signed on for? Is this what we really want to do? And so there's a part that's like, I want to be comfortable, I want to be safe. And then there's all of this mystery. No transparency. Jim Jones is pulled in and very guarded. Nobody knows what the hell is going on, and everybody's confused. The North Node was in Virgo at 25 degrees. Might now, if Jim were alive, he'd be experiencing or about to experience a nodal return because opposition, a nodal opposition because the North Node was in Virgo and it's currently it's a South Node right now, so he'd be experiencing a nodal opposition. But at this point, that means ideals. At 25 degrees, moving toward the end of Virgo, this is highly idealistic, very analytical, and to the detriment of everybody there, not very highly perfectionistic and highly analytical to the point of being highly critical. Nobody could have done anything right, and that means wherever Mercury is hanging out, and by the way, would give us a better idea. We're going to look into that in a bit. Sun and Uranus are aligned. They're both in the 10th house. The 10th house in criminal astrology is about the police and the public reaction to this in this criminal astrology chart. Uranus is about the unexpected. The sun is about consciousness. When it hit the public consciousness, people were shocked. This was very unexpected events. It was very disruptive, and people were left in awe, meaning the old understanding of awe, meaning a frightening event that just gobsmacks you. Uranus was in Scorpio and is the shot caller of the Aquarius ascendant. So the ascendant's in Aquarius. And that means that Uranus is calling the shots, and that is highly disruptive to the collective psyche. He would have come off as an enigma. Nobody would have understood anything that he was trying to do or why he was doing it. It would have scared quite a few people. That would have been the absolute experience. And most of the people who arrived on site after the events occurred were absolutely gobsmacked. Some of them didn't even know what to say. When they had to relay back to their superiors, even the superiors were gobsmacked. They're like, we can't believe this horrible, terrifying unexpected, shocking event has occurred. So Uranus always delivers the shocks, star people. The transiting Taurus moon is aligned with Chiron and Sun in Taurus, and so stability and comfort in the fourth house of home and belonging, trying to create stability, trying to create safety. I believe, and I'm speculating here, that what Jim Jones was trying to do was to make, he felt unsafe and unsecure, and he was trying to create safety and security for himself because he was highly anxious at this point. He was worried about all the press that was coming, raining down on his little commune, and he was afraid that martial forces, meaning military forces, were about to ride into the place and take it over, and he was terrified and didn't know what to do. His natal sun is facing off with a transiting sun in Scorpio. His natal sun is in Taurus, and they were facing off. So that's basically having to be more mindful. This is a push and a pull type of energy. There's a part of you that wants comfort, but then there's another part of him that also wanted to guard and protect, and another part that was acting out in a way that was meant to protect himself and what he built. He considered this commune and everybody in it to be his little fiefdom, his utopia, and they were messing with it, and he felt he was entitled to act out to protect what he'd built. And he just said multiple times, he just wanted all these people to just go away and leave him and his people alone. That's what he wanted. And so when you've got the natal sun facing off with a transiting sun, you're getting a crisis of consciousness. Pluto was in Libra, and it was facing off with natal Venus, the North Node, Uranus, and all of that, So natal Venus would have been is in Aries, and so is his North Node in Uranus. So that Pluto is facing off with all of that Aries energy. So you got people, the civilized world, because Libra is all about diplomacy, tact, peace-loving, harmony, being civilized, going up against all that assertive, aggressive energy that says, this is my spot, this is my place, and you will get out, and you're not welcome here, kind of energy. So extreme aggression meeting up with civilization. He didn't want anything to do with civilization. Also sextiling the Black Moon Lilith, natal Mars in Leo, is Libra's, Pluto is doing that. And that basically means all of that, plus natal Mars and squaring his natal Pluto and Jupiter. All of that is all about the focus is on him, on his wants, his needs, his anxiety, his feelings, his vision. And sextiles are great in a chart or in a person, when the person's able to make advantage of them. Here's the thing about sextiles and trines. They're only good if the person in question has the mindfulness and the presence to be able to make use of them. Otherwise, they're useless. And in this case, for him, they're useless. There's an overabundance of fire energy in his chart, making him, speaking to the fact that he's highly aggressive, highly fiery, and highly impulsive, which means he could do anything and did do anything. And it brought out that hyper-authoritarian in him, which Pluto and Jupiter in Cancer, is going to extremes, would definitely have, it would be exacerbated. The events exacerbated it. The astrology is giving us the narrative on how it could have looked from the inside via Jim Jones. So, as we move on, Mercury and Mars in Neptune, Mars, Mercury, and Neptune are all in Saturn. They're squaring off with Saturn and Virgo, and that means ideals and convictions and beliefs are the real world, or are clashing with the real world. So he is a very idealistic person. He wanted to serve, wanted to help. That's that Saturn part, wanting to build the bridges to help, and those beliefs are meeting up against, bashing up against, squaring, colliding with the civilized world, which has vastly different ideas, even at that point, of what was acceptable behavior. His ideals, which are highly socialistic, are absolutely in conflict with the collective in the world at that point. Now, this is all in the 11th house of community. That's the Sagittarius part. And that means, in a criminology chart, the 11th house stands for the community, which is very futuristic, very holistic, very about freedom. It's about freedom. But it's also about future impact, because people wonder, these ideas, these communes, it's a great idea, but it was also one of the last gasps of that sort of 60s idealism that started as early as the mid-50s and culminated toward the end of the late 70s. And so that idealistic behaviors that reached its peak in the late 60s, early 70s, by the time the Jim Jones massacre occurred, we were looking at its death knells. We're looking at all those socialist dreams and ideas suddenly not seeming so bright. And this event just highlighted the fact that maybe socialism wasn't all it's cracked up to be. And also, the Saturn is in the 8th house of endings, and so very, very, very. Saturn in the 8th house is all about authority. And it could be, you could see it rather like a father who kills his family. It's kind of like that type of vibe, hyper authoritarian, and it speaks to Saturn speaking to the endings. The 8th house in criminal astrology would be about the endings. And Virgo is very earthy, and so everybody died outside. Nobody was indoors. Most people were inside of the pavilion or around the pavilion at the time. So at this particular time on the 14th, this is very idealistic, very much wants to serve, but it's in clash with the current beliefs of the collective community. And so I would read it as Jim Jones's actions being fueled by anxiousness and perfectionism. He drilled, as I said, the temple members, so they presented a unified, happy front. So at the time that Ryan was appearing on the soil of Guyana, Jim Jones was at work with the People's Temple members, making certain that they presented the most unified, happy front so that Leo Ryan would go back to the United States with beautiful stories to tell about how wonderful things were, and that Jim Jones and his family would be left alone in peace. Now let's jump ahead, because I gave you a teaser, but let's jump ahead to the 18th of November. The sun is still in Scorpio, and Uranus and the MC are conjunct, and Venus joins at 7 degrees. So the sun hasn't changed. Let's focus on that Uranus and MC very briefly. So they're at the tightest in the chart, and that tells me that the MC is about your public perception. And I'd say mysterious. Enigma would be the public perception. And also, Uranus alongside for the ride, shocking, unexpected, meaning someone who's highly disruptive, mutative, and hard to pin down, and would be scary because you wouldn't be able to anticipate their actions. And on the 18th, everything was highly volatile. So none of the placements have changed since the 14th. So I shared the 14th. It's 4 days later. Not much is altered. That is the sun. Mercury is still hanging out. It is hanging out alongside of Mercury, as hanging alongside Neptune, and Mars is co-present. And what that tells me is that it's all about standing for one's beliefs and one's convictions. And even if that means that people are going to die. And it does mean that people are going to die. Absolutely. The ascendant has not changed. The third house is all in Aries, and that would be forming a nice little trine. So he would be backed by conviction, and it's very difficult to move people off of their convictions at any point. And so we're going to look lastly at that Pluto Pluto is hanging out in Libra. It is at 18 degrees at this point, so it's from the 9th house. And so what his belief systems, what his orthodoxy would be at that point, when you put Pluto in the 9th house, it would be very difficult. It would be enigmatic. But then you've got that kind of people-pleasy type of fawning energy. So when Congressman Leo Ryan and his entourage of reporters and aides and concerned family members turned up on that particular day, he was in a very fawning mood, a very people-pleasing mood. He was not outgoing. He was very withdrawn. He looked a little cool and was very engaging to a point where he shared the food, and everybody was happy and smiling. So at first, Congressman Ryan thought and said on camera, "Oh, everybody looks so happy." And so he thought he was wrong. Maybe he was misinformed. So they were prepared to leave, which Jim Jones was thrilled about. Until a note got passed to Congressman Ryan, in which the note said that everything Congressman Ryan had been told was absolutely accurate and true. And that is when all hell broke loose. At which point, Congressman Ryan decided, okay, I'm going to do the best I can to help people. Anybody that wants to leave can come with me. Jim Jones made a very good show of saying, hey, you can go if you want to go. And everybody said, great. It looked great. It really did, because we got that Pluto and Libra. We're going to go along to get along. It's going to look nice. It's going to look pretty. We're going to harmonize. That would be Venus hanging out somewhere. Let's check out Venus in its placement. It is in Scorpio. It's not in a healthy place. It's in the 10th house. Not a healthy spot for it. Venus likes to be in Taurus. It does not like to be in Scorpio. So this would be a guarded Venus. I want to harmonize, but I'm not going to show you my cards. And so they were allowed to leave. And everybody that wanted to go went. And the two planes were all set and ready, and they're all standing and ready, when all of a sudden a group of gunmen from the compound appear, and that's when all the bullets hail, and everybody runs off in varying directions, trying to find safety. When all is said and done, there are survivors, but there are a lot more people deceased, over 900, and few of the survivors left to tell the tale. Congressman Ryan did not survive the attack. He was killed initially when the bullets started being fired. And so we've got that Pluto ruling that sun, and that Uranus MC, that unpredictability came with a face of congeniality. Okay? So I think this is a good point for which to stop, because these are the final hours, and we're going to pick it back up in the next episode. So as we witness through the stars, blind faith can lead to unimaginable darkness. So when you're looking at Jupiter or anything Sagittarian or anything Neptunian, you can be looking at blind faith, meaning not questioning, because let's be honest, cult leaders technically, most of the time, do not want you to question them at all. Okay? So blind faith can lead to unimaginable darkness, and that is the key point. If you like what you're hearing, please feel free to check out the Daily Stargazer. We talk more about the more astrology leaning things, but we'll be bringing more of this type of stuff to that eventually. And you can find us on Instagram at the Outlaw Astrology, and you can also find us at the Outlaw Astrology on Pinterest and YouTube. And thank you very much for coming along for the ride. Next week, we'll be into the final episode, and we will explore the aftermath and the lessons learnt. So consider, star people, that the stars guide us, but we choose our path, not the stars. Stay cosmic, truth seekers.